So greetings, I'm Bobby Schnabel, External Chair of Computer Science at CU Boulder, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is part of our celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Department of Computer Science at CU. Looking down, we've already had close to 200 people join us, combination of CU students, faculty, staff, alumni, tech community members, and more. And thanks so much to all of you for participating. A word about questions. A number of you submitted questions as you registered. Thank you very much. You can also enter questions at any point using that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. But apologies in advance that we will inevitably get way more questions than we can address during the talk. We're delighted to have with us Professor Lecia Palin, who is a professor of both computer science and information science and the founding chair of the Department of Information Science, and Professors Gerhard Fischer and Clayton Lewis, both of whom, as you know, are world-renowned pioneers in HCI. With that, my pleasure to turn it over to Lecia, who will moderate.
Thank you, Bobby. I am so honored to introduce Gerhard Fischer and Clayton Lewis today. Both Gerhard and Clayton joined the Department of Computer Science and the Institute of Cognitive Science in 1984. At that time, cognitive science as a field was expanding, and CU was pioneering the connections between it and computer science through fields that Gerhard and Clayton were expert in: artificial intelligence and human-computer interaction, fields that themselves always have had an intertwined relationship. These were landmark faculty hires that brought more attention to the things that were already happening here at Colorado, led by Walter Kinch and Peter Polson. In our colloquium today, Gerhard and Clayton are going to review the highlights of this history. Gerhard is an emeritus faculty member and remains active in the field, and Clayton will be retiring this summer. They will reflect upon their time together at CU, including the importance of their involvements with computer science, cognitive science, and then later the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities and the Atlas Institute, as well as the Department of Information Science. They will reflect on how their work at CU contributed to the progress and current challenges of their fields. They will also comment on the seminal contributions of our dear colleague, the late Professor Mike Eisenberg. Lastly, in addition to being inspirational disciplinary pioneers, I know that for so many of us, and certainly to me, they have been lovely colleagues, mentors, and friends, and I thank them for all they have contributed to our community. I now turn things over to Gerhard.
So I am one of the two speakers, and I have the honor to go first. And I would like to structure my brief remarks into past, present, and future. So the past is sort of a personal history, maybe compared to many of the people who are listening. I am older. And so my acquaintance with computer science started in the 1970s. And personally, I think it's an interesting little story that originally I thought computers are pretty boring. They can compute, they are expensive and hidden from us. And then by a total accident, I ran into a book called Computers in Thought, and there were computer programs which played chess, tried to understand natural language. So this was all in the late 60s, early 70s. And that encounter formed really my personal interest from the very beginning, namely asking myself, can computers extend human abilities to think, play, learn, work, and collaborate? And term covering all of this was human-centered computing. Now, I started my career at the faculty level at the University of Stuttgart in Germany, and we had a large research project focused on human-computer interaction at the time, which was not a big field at the time. I would say another very important influences were the people who I considered my mentors. So I got interested in constructionist learning through my PhD and a postdoc at MIT with Seymour Papert. Very influential was some stays at Xerox PARC with Alan Kay. And there in the late 70s, I saw computers which I was convinced will be the future, how we will deal with computer, particularly WIMP-like interfaces. And then my interest in design was greatly influenced through extended and several stays at CMU with Herbert Simon. Again, younger people may not know these people, but take a look if you have a chance. So after this very far history, I arrived in Boulder in 1984, and I felt that I was at the right time, or it was the right time to be at the right place. They offered me a faculty position in the Department of Computer Science and a fellow position in the Institute of Cognitive Science. And there was the attempt to bring cognitive science, mostly directed by Walter Kinch, and computer science by Lee Osterweil, together, and they had enrichment funds from Bruce Ekstrand to establish a collaborative relationship. And the initial focus was actually on artificial intelligence, where I had worked off and on before I came to Boulder. Now, for me, the attraction to go to Boulder was computer science in Germany at the time was a formal discipline dominated by either mathematics or a technical discipline dominated by engineering. So there was no interest, no support. In many cases, actually, it was suppressed or not considered computer science or human-centered computing. So from the beginning, I found in Boulder, there was an academic environment in support of interdisciplinary collaborations between computer science, psychology, linguistics, architecture, education, and international collaboration between the US, Europe, and Japan. So let me now move to the present. And human-computer interaction is, at least in my mind, not a precisely defined term. And I tried to have concepts surrounding this core concept, which have played a role in my thinking, and also these define communities and research efforts with whom I interacted and we as a team interacted. So to show this through human-computer interaction, using these different domains, the bubbles in blue were efforts which we contributed to. There was several new buildings built, the Integrated Teaching and Learning Laboratory, the Discovery Learning Center, and the Atlas building. And in all cases, it was always simple to get a building going, but I mean, the community is really reflected on what that could mean. Then Leisha already mentioned, and she's the founding chair of information science, and cognitive science was established before Clayton and I came, but I think the linkage with the computer science department was improved through that we emphasized these research areas. Then in the early 90s, we created the Center for Lifelong Learning in Design. So these were all efforts which we actively contributed and whose existence has become important for the future. So as Leisha also already mentioned, one of our co-workers who joined us a few years after we came was Michael Eisenberg. And this picture shows him with his wife, Anne Eisenberg. And he participated in most of these efforts, which I mentioned on the previous slide. So the other thing which I think we profited from these activities, and but we also contributed to it, that during our time while Clayton and I were in Boulder, there were several major national research activities. For example, we contributed to a program, NSF program, Science of Design, which saw the human as a software engineer. We contributed to a program called Creative IT. And there was another effort, many of you may be familiar with STEM as a big effort, and there was an effort between the NSF and the National Endowment for the Arts, which conceptualized STEM to STEAM. And the last important effort was that the Coleman Institute was created at CU through a big grant from the Coleman couple. And this was led to research activities to work with people with cognitive disabilities. So I would like just to give you a sense of what we have done, to show you just two screenshots from two environments on which we worked for a long time. The first one is domain-oriented design environments. So this was a system which several people, PhD students, worked on, exploring different aspects of human-computer interaction, but also linked to knowledge-based components. One big effort was at the time to support not only human-computer interaction, but human problem domain interaction. So we wanted to empower professional kitchen designers to cope with computer systems, build new kitchens, and also extend the system with new components. So while this kitchen design system was focused on individual people, this environment, the Envisionment and Discovery Collaboratory, shows that groups of people can collaborate. We employed this to urban planning tasks, again, collaborating with other faculty members, specifically in this case with Ernesto Arias from Urban Planning and Architecture. In the middle, you see this horizontal table, which is actually a computer, and that we explored for several years the impact and power of tabletop computing environments to pursue issues in human-computer interaction. So I mentioned already that we were always interested in learning, and a major distinction which we made there, that learning when the answer is known, is how we often conceive learning. The teacher knows the answer, and we have curriculum and basic skills, and STEM education was conceptualized as. We were particularly interested in dealing with wicked problems, which stand for that they have no boundaries, no correct answers, and there are no competent teachers, but you rely on collaborative knowledge construction and social creativity. And where in the first case people solve problems, we were particularly interested in building computational environment to support problem framing. And the current corona pandemic, I think, is a problem which fits exactly this situation. Nobody knows the answer. We all struggle with it, and we try to test new environment. And we wanted to develop what we labeled socio-technical environment for the two different situations. So I would like to mention all of the people. Obviously, you don't do this, something like this by yourself. These are faculty and research scientists which worked with me, and several of them were already mentioned. And I had a large number of PhD students from all over the world. This is why I labeled the ones outside the US in blue, representing different countries. So let me finish by mention, where do we go from here? And over the last few years, I have worked on these three topics: design trade-offs, quality of life, and what would it mean to reflect on progress in science and technology. So design trade-off, here I give a particular example. As I said earlier, we were hired to basically at the time to promote artificial intelligence, but in some ways, human-computer interaction, I think, is more closely aligned with intelligent augmentation, where you do not replace the human being, but empower the human being with intelligent support systems. And there are trade-offs between the two approaches, and one, how to sort out this different trade-offs. Quality of life has become an important concept. So again, to show a little bit the history of this quality of life perspective, I mean, a lot of work in human-computer interaction started with making systems more usable, but usable systems which are not useful are of little value. So instead of seeing usable versus useful, we had a number of research grants to explore how we can bring usable and useful together. We also reflected on engaging environments where people would face different challenges as they get more experienced, and quality of life is a topic which has emerged out of all of this as a central design requirement. Next one. So this is my last one, to reflect a little bit, what does it mean to have progress in science and technology? And some people already asked in the questions which we got about ethics and so on. So if we cannot do something and we develop new technologies that we can do it. And I mean, there was huge progress made that we can now do things which we couldn't do before. But I think we should also ask ourselves, should it be done? And currently, with the worldwide attention for artificial intelligence, there are interesting questions about AI, what should be done there, what not, which objectives are feasible. There's a big discussion about fully autonomous weapon systems, where the human has nothing to do with human-centeredness. It's all dominated by algorithms. And another example would be social credit systems, which have become very popular in China, may have helped them to control the coronavirus. Lots of these systems have HCI components of doing user modeling, tracing people, and so on, personalizing systems. And so the focus area on the left side are new technologies, maybe safety of systems, reliability. Those are all important. But I think on the right side, we should think, what do these systems contribute to quality of life? How do they address ethical questions? And how do we shift control and autonomy between human beings and the computer. So I hope this has given you a sense. By necessity, there were no details, but the overall objective is that you get a sense what has happened with human-computer interaction at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and more general on a national level to move this research discipline forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerhard. All right, we're now going to turn things over to Clayton.
And of course, the big question is whether Clayton's slides will work. So let's try to see if we can, what's going on. Okay, I've had this problem before. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing, get the slides up again. Oh, this is really bizarre.
While we're waiting for Clayton.
Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Got it? Okay.
So
So
now-
remind folks that you can enter questions into the chat and we'll be asking them at the end of Clayton's talk.
All right. Okay, so there's slide number 1. James Garfield said that the perfect college would be Mark Hopkins on one end of a log and a student on the other. For me, the perfect university was our conference room, the old 7-24 with Walter Kinch, Peter Pulse, and Gerhard and our students. Walter and Peter were psych professors and we were all members of the Institute of Cognitive Science. Walter was the founding director. We had an NSF grant that gave us the chance to talk about a wide range of interrelated topics, especially cognitive architectures and human-computer interaction. Walter's work on the construction integration cognitive architecture was an early bridge between work on symbolic AI and the connectionist work we heard about from Paul Smolensky and Mike Moser in the last symposium. Did my slide advance? Can someone tell me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, excellent. One of the products of these conversations was a method called the cognitive walkthrough. Peter Paulson and his student Susan Davies had discovered a phenomenon they called label following. When a person is looking at a user interface and they see a control like a button with a label that seems to relate to what they're trying to do, they're very likely to press that button. That led us to think of a user as like the ball in a pinball machine, bouncing from control to control as the labels push them this way and that. As a designer, you need to try to arrange the pinball machine so that the ball follows the intended path. The name cognitive walkthrough was inspired by the concept of a code walkthrough. In a code walkthrough, you try to work out whether the machine, when executing your code, will do what you want. In a cognitive walkthrough, you try to work out whether or not a user, when doing what your user interface suggests, will do what they want. That is, does your interface provide adequate cues so that the user with a particular goal will be led to take the right actions and avoid wrong ones as they bounce through the pinball machine? Our student, Kathleen Wharton, helped develop these ideas into a workable analysis method. Many other students and collaborators contributed to the method in various forms. In the years since, the cognitive walkthrough has become one of the standard methods in user interface design around the world. There are many versions of it, and cognitive walkthrough will give you a boatload of hits on Google. We also adapted the method to apply to programming language design in something called the programming walkthrough. The key difference is that programming is shaped less by external cues like labels and more by things the programmer has to know, something we call guiding knowledge. A language designer has to design the guiding knowledge as well as the various features of the language. If the guiding knowledge is too extensive or too obscure, there's a problem. In one of the case studies we did, Ben Zorn, who was on our faculty at the time, and others were designing a preprocessor language. There was a feature that seemed plausible, but we just couldn't figure out how you could tell when you needed it. That's a failure of guiding knowledge. The feature was scrapped. I'll inject a couple of anecdotes about our efforts to get these ideas out. We submitted a paper on the programming walkthrough to the PLDI conference, Programming Language Design and Implementation, then is now a leading venue. Not very surprisingly, it was rejected. In those days, PLDI provided no feedback whatever on submissions beyond that 0 bit, but co-author Ben Zorn was on the program committee and he arranged for me to have a chat with the program chair. The chair was a little puzzled that we were puzzled. "Your paper is on design," he said. I said, "But isn't the name of the conference Programming Language Design and Implementation?" "Well, yes, but we don't actually take papers on design." We prepared a journal submission on the work and received the most negative review you could imagine. That was the first of the 3 reviews that we read, and although one of the others was quite positive and the other was okay too, that first one was so vitriolic that we were amazed that the action letter from the editor asked us to respond to the reviewer comments and submit a revision. We sucked it up and did that. This time, the first reviewer said, "Now the paper isn't an embarrassment. It's just the kind of paper that clutters up the literature and makes it harder to find the good work." The paper was published as a lead article in the journal for the next year. Thinking this over, we surmised that we had been blessed by reviews from the notorious Edsger Dijkstra, who was known to be a reviewer for that journal. He was famous for his comprehensively negative opinions, and that would explain the editor's willingness to set his objections aside. Happily, the world of programming language research has moved on and some design work does get published these days. I'm glad to see that. My original interest in HCI beginning a million years ago, when I was at IBM Watson working on compilers and language design, grew from a wish to make programming easier for people trying to get their work done. At CU, we've had a number of projects on new approaches to programming trying to do that. Alex Reppening's work on the agent seats language and its derivatives is in the center of an effort in Switzerland today to give all primary school teachers the ability to teach programming, one of the most comprehensive such efforts in the world. Steve Warren's work on rule languages is a key part of the Riverware system used today to manage water in the Colorado River system, though Steve is doing other things. Steve also did some of the early work on the theory of representations, work I'm still chewing on today. Building on ideas of one of my grad school mentors, Dave Krantz, and Amos Tversky, Jock McKinley, Mike Genesareth, and others, one can see that representation depends centrally on mappings between domains that preserve useful structure. Here, we're mapping a world of sticks into a world of numbers, taking advantage of a correspondence between connecting sticks and adding numbers. We take it for granted that if we connect a stick of length 3 and a stick of length 2 in the right way, we get a stick of length 5 because 5 is 3 plus 2. I'm suggesting 2 questions about this among many that repay thought. First, what's the role of addition here? Could we have a system of measurement that is like the familiar one, where you use a ruler of some kind to measure the 2 sticks, but then to predict the length of the combined sticks, you multiply the numbers instead of adding them? Answer, yes, you could. How about subtracting rather than adding or multiplying? Answer, no. Exercises for the listener. A deeper question is the one framed by Richard Hamming. Why does any of this work at all? There are useful reflections in this about the place of computer science in the world. John Zelli, in a good book, intro book that we've used, says the fundamental question in computer science is what can be computed? I know why he says that, but I think he's wrong. That question isn't why the whole world cares about computing. The whole world cares because fundamentally, computational systems are representational systems. Computational representations have all kinds of incredibly useful properties. Our special province as computer scientists, one we share with mathematicians, is the study of representations that are largely independent of application domain somewhere up there and physical implementation down there. The picture you're seeing here aims to show that, and hence how what we do relates to what everybody else in the world does. It was a byproduct of the wonderful planning process that Bobby Schnabel led many years ago that was meant to lead to a college of computing and may yet do so. In the meantime, it did lead to the creation of the Atlas Institute. Back to that work on languages. An offshoot of that was the Science Theater Teatro de Ciencias project at Uni Hill School across from the UMC. We use new software tools, including especially agent sheets, to enable elementary school children to build working models of how and why things happen. The idea was to create not animations that just show what things look like, but models that represent mechanisms and that can be manipulated. For example, one girl built a model showing how vermiculite in potting soil helps plants to grow. Model water drops would percolate quickly right through the model soil so the rootlets couldn't reach the water unless the water drops encountered vermiculite particles that would hold them in place. You could add model vermiculite to the model soil or not and see what would happen. There's a story from this work that links to something we'll talk more about in a minute. Kids needed a little help in their modeling, and for us to provide the help, we needed to do some preparation ourselves. So it was useful to get an idea of what the kids wanted to model. As we were discussing that, one group of kids said they really wanted to model how mummies are made. I think they were intrigued by the part about pulling the brains out through the nose. I was unsure about this. It didn't seem to have much to do with science, which was what this project was supposed to be about. One of our advisors on the project was Trish Rankin, a particle physicist here at CU. In my next meeting with Trish, I asked about the mummy idea. She said immediately, let them do the mummies. When I asked why she was so certain, she said, I'm a particle physicist today because when I was a schoolgirl, I was fascinated by mummies. She told me the story. Her interest in mummies extended to a larger interest in archaeology. Archaeology includes methods for dating things. A key dating method uses the decay of carbon-14. Decay involves particles, and voila, particle physics. Over the years, we were blessed with many wonderful other students with many important ideas. I really regret not being able to talk about all of them. Of course, I also want to thank NFF and other funding bodies for support over the years. One of the people involved in that last project was Mike Eisenberg. As you might have noticed in the list of collaborators, I want to add my thoughts to what Gerhard has said. Here's Mike again with his son, Adam. Earlier, I said that ECOT 724 was the perfect university. Well, not quite. Mike Eisenberg wasn't in that circle. Mike was a person with very many extraordinary qualities and abilities. Those sculptures you saw in Gerhard's picture of Mike and his wife, Anne, were created using Anne's dissertation project, Hypergamy, a CAD system that lets kids create things like those. Hypergamy led off an influential research program on computational crafts, work that did much to launch the maker movement of today. Anne is continuing that work in the lab the two of them founded, now the Shepherd Craft Technology Lab. Mike was a playwright with more than one work performed. He'd worked at the Children's Television Workshop where Sesame Street was created. He was seldom without a satchel full of books, which he somehow found time to read. His laugh made you laugh. More seriously, he had many ideas about education and its possibilities. Lacia will put a link in the chat to a paper of Mike's that presents some of these ideas. Among many, the idea of Mike's that I think about most often is the following. I've not been able to find it spelled out in Mike's writings, so I'm offering you my paraphrase from many conversations with him. As long as educational research insists on looking for things that work pretty well for most people, education will be bounded away from its true potential. That's because learning is driven best by interest, and there's nothing that everybody is keenly interested in. An educational system should be a mosaic of many different things so as to appeal differently to different learners, and it should encourage everyone to develop their own interests. Perhaps you can see the link to the story about Trish Rankin, the mummies, and particle physics. The trajectory Trish followed was just the kind of thing Mike worked very hard to open up for all learners. We were invited to say a few things about the future. I'd like to start with a look back even before the ancient history we've been talking about. As detailed in George Dyson's fabulous book, Turing's Cathedral, computing used to be like a fantastically precious fluid. There were no limits to the ridiculous lengths people were willing to go to, like storing signals by recirculating them through tanks of mercury, or smearing charges on the face of CRT tubes, as in the machine in the picture. They did these things to get even a teaspoon of that precious computation fluid. Today, it can be suggested that we have too much of the stuff, something like the situation that Uncle Scrooge and companions created when they sluiced the remaining gold out of the lost mines of the Incas. There are many aspects to this too much, but one is our tendency to make software ever more complicated as we pile bells on top of whistles. Did you know that you can stack up the icons on your Mac desktop so that you can only see the top one in each stack? Did the genius who created that feature consider the consequences when someone does that without meaning to and becomes terrified that most of their files have been deleted? A recent story in the Post shed some light on this kind of thing. Research suggests that people are much more likely to try to solve problems by adding things to a situation rather than taking things away. One hope I have for the future can be expressed as a question. Can we push back against this tendency and create a simpler world for ourselves? Here's another question, another optimistic question about the future. We are used to communicating by creating not content, but presentations of content. For example, the PhET project in our physics department here at CU has created scores of wonderful interactive simulations to communicate physics concepts to high school and college students. Until recently, these have been utterly useless to learners who can't see well. PhET's Emily Moore and Taliesin Smith are now doing pioneering work to create auditory presentations of the same content. In the future, will it be possible to create models of physical systems and other things we're interested in separate from any presentation that can be rendered in animations or in speech or using refreshable tactile displays, or who knows? The next question relates to that language work. Today, people who need a software system to manage their affairs, like professional caregivers, for example, are mostly at the mercy of people who have the technical skills needed to create the software that they need, and who often control the resulting resource flows, that is, money. Can we create software tools that ordinary people can command? People associated with the Psychology of Programming interest group are working towards this, and maybe you in the audience can help. Here's the last question about the future. At different times and in different ways, Norbert Wiener, Joseph Weizenbaum, Phil Agre, and Virginia Eubanks have all warned against surrendering our autonomy to our computational creations. Can you help us with this one? So many thanks to the organizers, to all of you in the audience for this opportunity to remember and reflect.
Thank you so much, Gerhard and Clayton. Lovely talks. We have a series of questions, and I'll begin so that we can get through as many as we can. I'll begin with a question, one for Clayton and then another for Gerhard, and then the other questions are going to be for both of you. The first one will go to Clayton, and this is actually from Robert Weaver, and he recalls that you offered the following working definition for AI in your graduate AI class about 35 years ago. So thanks to Robert for being here. So apparently you said that AI is the study of solving problems that are really hard for computers to solve. With 35 years of additional study, how would you define AI now?
Well, I probably wouldn't, Bob. I don't have to anymore. But it's interesting. It's an interesting question. I think it's fair to say that the ground has shifted quite a bit. And one index of that is that I can remember as a graduate student that whereas people imagined that someday computers would play chess pretty well, many people seriously believed that it would never happen that computers could play Go well. That just seemed way beyond what was on the intellectual horizon at the time. And of course, we know that's in the rear view mirror. So it's difficult today to define things that are hard for computers to do in the way that it was easy to do in the epoch that you're reminding us of. Now, this doesn't mean that such things don't exist. Actually, I'll quote Jim Martin on this one. Progress in natural language processing is obvious, but Jim has said a couple of years ago, you know, we can do all kinds of wonderful things with language as long as you don't ask us to say what it means. He's a little bit more optimistic 2 years later, but still that's a frontier. But things really have changed, and thanks for the opportunity to think about in what ways.
Thank you, Clayton. Okay, the next question is for Gerhard. This is from Eric Scharf. And he asks, an exciting aspect of L3D was interdisciplinary research. And he cites computer science, architecture, journalism, and cognitive science, and more. If you were to include new disciplines today, what do you think would be the most critical?
Well, I think we enumerated some of the interesting ones. I think there are a number of issues, for example, what Clayton brought up with that we suffer from information overload, participation overload, choice overload. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we should forget about complex systems. So I think people who have thought about what are these problems where we struggle for solutions, and I think COVID is a good example for it. Nobody knows the answer. So how do you bring these people together? The other thing which we haven't really mentioned too much, a lot of the techniques in human-computer interaction rely on personalization, that we have user models of the people, and this raises really big issues about privacy. And the social credit system in China would be a good example of illustrating this. So we have disciplines like who worry about ethical questions, about anthropological questions. So in some ways, as long as humans use computers in which they do now for almost all disciplines, this discipline should contribute to human computer interaction of the future.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have more questions coming in. Let me take one that focuses a little bit on cognitive science as an origin point for human-computer interaction. And I'm not sure who the speaker is, but the question he or she asks is the application of cognitive science to HCI, does it have any drawbacks, such as an overextension of a paradigm as it seems mostly positivist?
No, I can take that one to begin with. Partly as an old and veteran positivist, I'm going to deflect part of it, but in a way that I think is responsive actually to mention again the paper by Mike Eisenberg that the link to which Leisha placed in there. So in part that paper, in fact, in large part, that paper is a critique of cognitive science as an adequate framework for considering problems in education. And I appreciate that the question has a wider scope than that, but just to pick off a part of it, Mike really emphasized that education is about the whole person and about especially the whole social person in a way that cognitive science has often struggled with. I'm sure there are cognitive scientists nowadays, especially who are all about understanding social context and the like, but Mike's critique, I think, was on target, that cognitive science had too narrow a view of what really mattered for people and for learners. And Mike in particular pointed to the value of incorporating insights from anthropology. So I'll leave that as a kind of a teaser for people who may want to read. I hope people want to read Mike's thoughts. This is a very thought-provoking paper.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, for either of you who would like to take this question, what is one area that human-computer interaction has been detrimental to life in some way?
Well, from my point of view is that a lot of research has been going on looking or reducing human-computer interaction to user interfaces. And I think human-computer interaction should have a much wider scope. It includes the user interface, but it is not the same, or it should not be restricted to the user interface. So I think if you have a poor system and you want to build a good user interface, or someone builds a good user interface, it still remains sort of not a good system because the underlying structures are not available. And so in my mind, I had this one slide going from usable to usable and useful, engaging. These are all elements which I think are still underrepresented in the research. So a too narrow focus, assuming we know what human-computer interaction is, I think we should see it as a moving target, and we should ask ourselves, looking 10 years back where the world was, or 20 years back, was very different. What do we imagine what will happen in 10 years or 20 years from now? And this reflects back to education, because we educate people which we hope what we confront them with will remain valuable for the future, without anyone knowing the future.
Shall I move on to the next question?
Sure.
Okay. What gives you hope for an ethical, inclusive future of the human-computer interaction field?
Well,
Clayton doesn't, I can go first and then Clayton can go second if you don't mind.
Sure.
I mean, as I argued in my last slide, I mean, there is really the question, not only can we do it, but should we do it? And I mean, again, sometimes it's helpful to think about particular examples. And I think one of is a big discussion point, and numerous people contribute to this, is that you have completely automatic weapon systems. So it started off, there was a pilot in a plane and he decided to throw a bomb. Then there was a human being somewhere in Nevada, kind of organizing or deciding when a drone should throw a bomb. And the newest model is that this is all done by algorithms. And I mean, these questions about control and autonomy show up in all kinds of situations. I think another very prominent example is self-driving cars, which is another hot topic, where we can again distinguish the artificial intelligence approach, where the human is totally left out of the picture, which is sort of futuristic ideas, or that we put a big emphasis on intelligent driver assistance systems, which would be more, I think, in the spirit of human-centered AI or human-computer interaction. In all of these cases, ethical questions play a very critical role.
Yeah, I'll comment as well. So in brief, what makes me optimistic is all of you out there, including among the rest of you, the person who raised the question, the very good question about positivism and its impact. So what makes me optimistic about our students and you is your recognition that technical solutions don't define and constrain our possibilities. They represent opportunities of some kind, but we need to look beyond them to really address the problems of most substantial concern. And Gerhard has made this point as well. The world is full of wicked problems. These don't lend themselves to technical solutions. And I've been very happy to see among our students a keen appreciation of that fact. So I'm optimistic about how things will go in the hands, especially of our students.
Wonderful, thank you. Actually, keeping in that theme of our students, Carrie Sadler, who is one of our undergraduate advisors in computer science, asks, what is one piece of advice you would offer a first-year student exploring the field of computer science?
I'll go first on this one. Emphasize that word, explore. So one of the things that you'll learn is that computer science provides opportunities to contribute to virtually any sphere of human existence, which means that you don't have to choose between being interested in and excited about computer science and being interested in and excited about other things. So take and make the opportunity to do that exploration, pursue your interests as Trish Rankin did, and as Mike Eisenberg would have encouraged you to do, knowing that there's a place for your interests, whatever they turn out to be within the world of computing.
Well, I think the tricky question is, when the internet came along at that time, let's say it was in 1995 or whatever, I was already teaching for close to 20 years. And if I would have said, well, I know this now, I have done this for so long. I would know nothing about the world of computing today if people don't know about the internet. So for me, the interesting question is that we always try to understand what's coming next, and what we have achieved so far is a stepping stone, and how we articulate these questions. And we all may come to different conclusions, but sort of my personal conclusion is, this is why I mentioned this at the beginning of my arguments, that it always interested me, how can the digital world make the life better for all of us? And that led to these notions of quality of life, but at the same time being aware that being better is very difficult to define and requires the discussion of many stakeholders. So if someone starts, I would say, I completely agree, and this was sort of a shared element, that we wanted to support interest-driven learning rather than learning determined by an existing curriculum. And then computer science is so wide that there are 100 paths, and an individual has to choose what is most interesting to them.
Thank you. Well, as we're getting to the end of our hour together, I wanted to just first make sure we thank Aaron Judge and Amy Richards, who are working in the background here to make all this happen. Thank you to them. We want to thank Bobby Schnabel for organizing this event. And of course, we want to thank Gerhard and Clayton for being here, but also being here for all those years where we really needed you and appreciated your contributions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everybody.
And thanks. I'll just wrap this up with a couple of announcements. First, I hope you'll join me in some thunderous virtual applause for Gerhard, Clayton, and Leisha. I'll do the real applause. You can do the virtual. And a few just very quick announcements. We will have a recording of this webinar available in about a week. And at that point, we know where you all are electronically, and we'll send you all a link to it. There have been questions in the chat about whether we can get the slides out, especially with the malfunction. That malfunction was meant to prove that there's still a need for better human-computer interaction in the world, by the way. And so, yeah, as long as it's okay with our speakers, we will do that. And I will mention that we have set up something called a Founders Fund to honor all of our pioneering faculty in computer science, including Clayton and Gerhard, and we'll get you information about that as well in case you're interested. And as a very final comment, our 50th anniversary celebration is going on for a while. We were meaning to have an in-person gala event last fall. We are allowed to extend 50 as long as we want, and we will be doing one when in-person rules permit, and you will all get to hear about it. So thank you all so much for joining us.